Welcome to the Procurement Software Podcast, where we aim to educate and inspire you about how technology is changing and shaping our profession. The truth is, there's never been a more exciting time to be in procurement, but only if you're one of those organizations that's embracing the change and driving new developments. And this podcast is all about giving you the tools to help you get there. So buckle up and let's get right into this week's show. Yes, very warm welcome to another episode of the Procurement Software Podcast. Very warm welcome back to this show, our February episode. And today's episode is going to look all about the subject of free B2B software, particularly free B2B procurement software. Because in procurement especially, vendors are increasingly finding more success by removing the price barrier. And that's because, well, as procurement professionals, we often don't have a budget to go out and buy software. And it's a long sales cycle, isn't it? If you have to go and put a business case and go to the CFO with your begging bowl to go and get a budget for software, there are a lot more touch points along that route to be able to get approval than if it's a free piece of software that you can essentially access immediately. So in this episode, we're going to break down the pros and cons of free B2B apps and explore how the underlying commercial model really works using my guest's specific example. We'll also look through a couple of other examples too, but we're specifically going to deep dive into this specific example so as you can get an idea of how it works on the back end and how free doesn't always necessarily mean that you are the product or that you're being exploited in some way. So Tom Ruello, VP of Sales from SpendHound, is my guest to talk about this subject today. Tom, very warm welcome.
Thank you, James. Excited to be here on the Procurement Podcast with you today.
Awesome. So before we jump in, Tom, maybe just if you can give a really quick introduction of who you are and what SpendHound does in the wider context of the business. So I think that'll allow the listener, to get a little bit more of an understanding of why what you're offering is essentially a free at the points of entry product.
Yeah, for sure. I can give a bit of an overview of SpendHound, but then it might even be helpful to understand, why did we even do this? How did this even come about? And why did this kind of model that we were able to put together sort of make sense? So yeah, I oversee sales and partnerships for a product called SpendHound. Essentially, we help companies with a platform that helps you stay organized around all of your software. And so we provide full visibility into your software stack, renewal reminders, as well as cost optimization strategies. We've grown to north of 1,000 customers. That means we have really robust benchmarking data. And so we have a platform as well as we have a number of other features that help with the procurement process, including procurement approval workflows, contract repository, budgeting tools, cloud tracking, and a number of other features that I'd be happy to dive into if helpful. Would it be helpful to maybe start with sort of how we even got into this? Because our company historically did not do this at all.
Yeah, I think it would actually, Tom, just for context, and then I can sort of quiz you a little bit on how the monetization model works after that. Yeah,
for sure. So SpendHound's actually a product from a larger company called Yippit Data. Today, we're a roughly 800-person market research firm. It built a pretty big business doing this. We had Carlyle invest just under $500 million in the business a few years ago. Now, the interesting thing, a few years ago, our company was growing really quickly and we were buying a lot of tools. We didn't have a procurement process in place at all. We were at that sort of very typical stage where we hadn't yet built out the procurement function, but we had a lot of spend and it was a really decentralized process. And so we sort of realized, hey, we need to start tightening the belt a little bit here. There's potentially a lot of waste. The classic, CFO getting invoices for things that they didn't even know we were paying for, people leaving the company and not knowing about tools. So the typical challenges companies face when they're in that sort of growth stage and haven't yet really tightened their belt around procurement processes. And so we started looking for different tools in the market that could potentially help us. And at this point, we still didn't have a procurement person, but it was really sort of falling under finance to sort of go and see what we could do to implement a bit of better hygiene as part of the process. And we started looking at tools, and there was a number of tools that had similar functionality to what we're doing today. The challenge was, it was just really hard to justify the ROI. We're getting sort of $100,000 quotes. They were like, well, who's going to implement this? What's the ROI going to be? And ultimately, we just couldn't really come to the decision to go and buy a tool. And that was after, knowing that there was cost savings to be had. But I think it's also a philosophy thing. Our company was growing quickly, and there just wasn't as much desire to invest in tools that help with cost savings, as opposed to investing in tools that maybe would help with the growth side. As a sales leader, it was never that difficult for me to get access to budget to implement sort of new go-to-market strategies and try to drive more revenue growth. But to the counter of that, it was nearly impossible for us to think about purchasing a tool that would help us, maybe even helping more on kind of like the margin expansion. And so that's kind of how this all came to be. We saw that us as a business were a perfect test case of type of company that need a tool like this, but just aren't willing to necessarily pay for it.
Yeah, and what you just described, it's funny listening to a sales guy explaining that, because we in procurement often bemoan the fact that sales and to some extent HR get the investment in the tools that they need, and they don't seem to have such a hard time putting together a business case and getting budget. But as you say, when it comes to looking at controlling or managing spend, bizarrely, when you consider in some organizations, especially in manufacturing firms, up to 60-70% of that company's revenue could be raw materials and purchase parts that go into or spend with external suppliers or vendors of some description. But what you've explained is the classic problem that us procurement professionals have in a nutshell, that it's often very difficult to get budget, especially, as you were saying, 6-figure budget. So that obviously brings me conveniently back around to the point that if someone is approaching procurement with a tool that's free, on the one hand, procurement is going to be interested and they're going to want to snap your hand off on the one side because they know that they're unlikely to get significant budget to invest in that type of product. But then on the other hand, we're pretty cynical people in procurement because we deal with a lot of sales folks and we listen to a lot of BS from suppliers on a day-to-day basis because that's the nature of the job. We're used to being confronted with sales pitches and cold email left, right, and center. So I'm obviously going to look at this perhaps from the angle of, if it's free, then I must be the product in some way. And typically, if you're not working on the freemium model where you're offering people a taster and then you're monetizing it when they want more features or when they want more credits, which I know is not the model that you guys use, then you have to monetize it in one of two ways typically. Either you're operating some kind of marketplace model where either the buyer or the supplier is paying per transaction or per impression that they get on the site, if it's some kind of marketplace, or it's more on a database model where the data from you as the user is being marketed in some way as the asset. Walk me through a little bit what your business model is, so as our listeners can understand and be able to evaluate the risk for their organization personally.
Yeah, for sure. And we obviously get asked these questions. I've been around long enough to know that nothing is free, and we're really transparent about it. So the way that our business works is Yipit Data. We're essentially in the business of providing data and insights to two key segments. To institutional investors, we work with 500 or 600 of the world's top hedge funds, investment managers, and private equity firms, but also increasingly working with large corporates as well that use data to understand market share analysis and make strategic decisions. The way our business model works is we provide the tool 100% free of charge, and then we de-identify and aggregate that data that we're capturing, and then we're able to produce market research off the back of that. Now, the model isn't anything totally new. A lot of companies have been doing similar things for a long time. You can even go back as far as sort of Nielsen ratings and the fact that people would sort of input their ratings for specific shows, and then they would sort of aggregate that data. And there's a lot more even modern companies. I mean, the interesting part about the model is Actually, a lot of companies do this. The difference is they also typically charge you as well. They have multiple monetization strategies. Take Gartner as an example. That's how they capture all the data. People share their data with them. They speak to their analysts. They share specific terms and contracts. And then Gartner will use that data to produce sort of market insights, to produce different reports, to produce sort of one-off conversations and benchmarking with you. But they'll also charge you a lot of money as well. Similarly, there's a lot of other businesses out there that will focus more on sort of the product that they're providing you, and they'll charge you a service for that. But they also have ways to monetize the data on the back end. And so it's more of like an exhaust sort of data set and more of like an exhaust revenue stream for them. Whereas for us, it's the primary revenue stream. And so the nice thing is for the consumer is it means you truly understand that like you're not going to be paying for this product because we do have a viable business model. And I think that's the key piece to your point. It's like, is this a bait and switch? Is this, are they going to be upselling me on something? And we get all those questions. Like, am I going to suddenly get charged? Am I going to, suddenly get this like, bait and switch on the business model? But because we have a viable business model that allows us to make real money on the back end, then you can have a lot of comfort that ultimately like this does make sense. And I think that's what it all comes down to. If, you're right, procurement people are skeptical and they know what questions to ask because you've seen every trick in the book. And so that's why I think it's just important that you truly understand the business model and how people are making money and ensuring that is a viable business model. And we often get questions around that, like how much, money can you make from this? Is it viable? Are you going to keep, committing to the product and developing the product over time?
Yeah, and I think you've explained that really well, and I appreciate you being transparent on that. And so I think if I summarize then, anyone that uses this is not going to get a call from one of your salespeople trying to upsell them on something. So, the pro is that it is free, and it really is free for users to be able to operate and use the software on a day-to-day basis and not just on a short term or with limited features. However, I think I also want to be cognizant that we need to align user expectations as well. And if it's a free product, then you're not going to put a development team onto building specific customer requested extensions or plugins or anything like that enables it to integrate or communicate with other software that they have, right? So there's always going to be a balance between, the expectation on the customer side if they're not paying for a product.
Yeah, I mean, the way we think about that is we always want to make the product more valuable. And so we are continually adding new features. We're continually building integrations that make sense. If you came to us and said, I want to pay you X dollars to do this one specific thing for us, that doesn't really make sense for us because that's not sort of our goal isn't to maximize direct revenue. But if you came to us and said, hey, this product would be much more valuable if your procurement workflows had this feature, we would go and test that with our other clients. And if it made sense, we'd build it. And you can see that. I mean, we only launched this product just over 2 years ago. And the feature set is on parity with companies that have raised hundreds of millions of VC dollars and have been around for 5+ years. And I think that just shows the commitment that we've sort of shown to developing the product because ultimately our goal is to acquire new clients. And the only way you do that is by having features that get people really excited, by having a product that is sticky and people want to keep using, and that ultimately they will then recommend. And they're going to, recommend to others. It doesn't really work. Even if it's free, it's got to be valuable. Like that's one of the biggest learnings I've had is that, going to someone and saying, here's something free, do you want it? The answer is invariably going to be no. Like if I came to you, James, and said, here's a t-shirt that, you don't necessarily like. It's got some band on it that you don't like. Do you want it because it's free? You're going to say, no, I'm not going to wear that t-shirt. Like that's, I'm just not going to wear it. I'm not going to waste my time, spending, acquiring that if I'm not going to use it. And so similarly, there's a cost. There's a cost to acquiring every product outside of the actual monetary cost. There's the time, there's the opportunity cost, there's legal security implications. And so ultimately, you've got to deliver a really valuable product. And that's why we continue to kind of invest every single year and frankly, every month we're updating the features.
So if it's a product request that you could roll out to the wider user base, then you would freely and happily consider that. It's more a case of if someone comes to you with a very bespoke, unique extension requirement that's only going to be related to them, that there's no benefit to you in terms of your business model to offer that feature.
Exactly right. With that said, there's ways you can still sort of keep people happy. So for instance, we're starting to think more about building more open APIs, about building kind of MCP servers, things like that. And so when you can build a structure within your product that allows flexibility for people to achieve what they want to achieve, that kind of gets you the best of both worlds. But we basically do all of our product enhancements off customer feedback. We're continually tracking what people are requesting, and then we prioritize based on those requests.
And it's an integration that you make with the company, with the customer's source of record, ERP system typically, or financial system. So in terms of them being worried about their data being hostage if they decide to exit or no longer use the tool, I guess other than the data that they've shared with you, there's no data that's sat natively within the SpendHound platform that they're not going to be able to get their hands on, right? Because they're feeding their data into your system and you're analyzing it, but there's no proprietary data that's sat within SpendHound.
Correct. I mean, within all of our terms of service, there's data deletion records, there's the ability to kind of delete all historical data if you want from us. And so for sure, for us, what's critical when you're building a model like this is that you, one, are transparent about it. That's really critical. And then two, you make sure people are comfortable. And so if they're not comfortable, then the whole system doesn't work. It's as simple as that. And, we launched just over 2 years ago, and we're now north of 1,000 customers, which is, I think, more than almost any other player in the market, which just goes to show that the business model makes sense for them and they can get comfortable once you share the details with them. We added more than 50 customers in January. We're on track to add 50 to 60 new customers in February. And so it really comes down to understanding the concerns and making sure that they're really comfortable with how we're operating.
Who do you think this typically sits well with, just based on your experience of customers that you've acquired so far, and looking a little bit longer term further down the road? Are you hoping to take this a bit more up market in terms of the end customers that you're able to onboard?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we've historically worked with mostly sort of mid-market type companies, so up to sort of 1,000 type employees was a real sweet spot for us. The types of companies that were going through that growth stage and didn't necessarily have a procurement team first. We worked with a lot of finance leaders, or they had a small procurement team and they just ultimately didn't have kind of the budget to sort of buy and sometimes extremely expensive kind of procurement tool. And so for them, this is an absolute no-brainer. And we acquired a lot of those customers very quickly. We are now sort of starting to see sort of two things happen. One, turns out there's actually a lot of pretty large enterprises that don't have very good systems in place. Even them, despite having hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in revenue, they're still operating on spreadsheets. And there's this like weird thing where companies seem to improve their procurement processes and as they mature. And then it all starts to deteriorate as they get even larger because they have all these disparate systems because they make acquisitions and the kind of business gets messy again. And so often as companies approach that stage, things are a bit of a mess and they don't have centralized views of all their spend. And so we're finding a lot of those companies that come to us and sort of want to work with us. And so we've naturally been signing up a lot of larger companies more recently. Additionally, because of the robust benchmarking data we've been able to build, a lot of those larger companies are coming to us and want to use us purely for benchmarking data. You can imagine if you're a multi-100 million to multi-billion dollar revenue business, you don't have time to really focus on all of those software renewals. It's a very long tail. They might have 300, 400, 500 different vendors. And for the most part, the procurement leaders are spending their time on the top, 10% of those deals because they typically make up, 80% of the cost. And so it makes sense. But what that means is a lot of opportunity on that sort of mid to long tail. And we have great benchmarking data across them. So rather than them focusing on that $100,000, $200,000 renewal, they'll come to us and we will help them with the benchmarking data. We have a team of procurement experts that will actually even help put together the negotiation strategy. And based off all of this, we're actually developing a product that we plan to release in the next month or two an enterprise-focused product that's very much AI-driven. I think one thing we've learned from procurement teams is time savings is actually just as important as cost savings. Because without time, you can't really focus on the cost savings and prioritize your time. And so we're building this AI-driven product that will allow us to analyze your contracts proactively, tell you where there's opportunity, tell you across your renewals where you've got competitive pricing and where you don't have competitive pricing. And then we'll even lay that all out for you in terms of the pricing benchmarks and the negotiation sort of opportunity and strategy that you should employ to achieve that, which will ultimately just save a lot of time. And so we plan to release that in the next sort of couple of months.
So as part of that journey of you being able to onboard your first enterprise clients, that's given you insight around some of the value props that you could deliver over and above what the current product gives, which I guess is always going to be valuable insight, right? What do you then, when you're looking at selling this into a larger organization, and I get completely what you say, that even if they've got a fairly mature procurement team with IT category managers, they're going to be managing, the Microsofts, the SAPs, the Salesforces of the world, but they're probably not going to be monitoring, relatively small SaaS startups that are selling a $29 a month per seat sort of license model. What are the challenges that typically you get from those type of organizations, in-house legal or corporate IT teams, especially if you're going to them with a free of charge product? Do you get a lot of cynicism and a lot of additional due diligence done on you because of that?
We do for sure, which it's kind of funny because ironically, a lot of the companies I already work with actually have similar data rights to us. There's a lot of tools out there, but if you read the fine print, have the exact same level of kind of data rights. Some of them are very big companies that a lot of companies use. And so it's kind of interesting that they do put that extra focus on it. With that said, we're signing a lot of enterprises right now. We've seen that to be our fastest growth category in the last kind of 12 months since we started focusing on it. And so, we've definitely kind of, I think, struck a chord here and that it seems to be hitting. I think the piece that people get concerned about is like the very specific contract terms. And ultimately the way that they get comfortable is that it's all fully aggregated. And so never at any point would one company's terms be shared externally because they're de-identified and then aggregated. As you can imagine, if someone wants a benchmark across their, DocuSign renewal, you can't get a valuable, benchmark unless you've got a sort of a statistically significant sample of spend to put against it. And so we never share benchmarks until we have that statistically significant sample, which is, typically an absolute minimum of 5, but you're sort of hoping for sort of 10 or 20 different relevant examples to make sure that you've actually got a great benchmark. And so, once people understand that like our specific terms are never actually shared, they get a lot more comfortable with the model.
Got it. And if someone was perhaps in the marketplace for something like this now, and they were considering both paid solutions that perhaps offer a bit more in terms of features or service, or a free tool such as SpendHound in terms of being able to benchmark and optimize their SaaS spend, what would be the typical questions that you would recommend that they ask, just so as they can come out at a point where they're able to make the right decision for them? Because SpendHound might be a good fit for them, it might not, depending on what they need. So what sort of questions should they be asking the different providers to be able to answer that question for them?
Yeah, I mean, look, firstly, it's got to be a feature set that actually works for you. Like that's important. And so, we see that, and that's why we invest so heavily in the product, because it's got to fit your needs and actually be able to help you out. And so, yeah, firstly, doing a deep dive on the product and making sure that it really fits your needs. In terms of kind of the pricing model, I'd want to know what that's going to look like over the next kind of 3 to 5 years, and what are the expectations you have. Because, when you're signing up to a product, we see this firsthand is often the pricing that you're quoted for your first year can then get, astronomical over the next 3, 4, 5 years. And so you'd want to make sure that it fits within sort of your long-term budgets. I think one thing that we do see on the pricing side is, people often get concerned. They're like, well, is this a viable business model? Are you going to be around? I think, sometimes that's a true concern. It's like, are you going to be around in 2 or 3 years? Or is this just like some short-term blip? I mean, the interesting part about that is like, we're part of a large, profitable business. There are many other vendors out there that, don't, and that's not the case. They aren't profitable. And so I would actually be more concerned about how profitable the underlying business is that's supporting this, because, we've seen a lot of businesses in this space. It's become, frankly, like pretty sort of noisy space. There's a lot of vendors in the space, and some of them aren't doing as well. And sort of as that happens, the development in the product drops off. As that sort of VC money that they've raised, is no longer available. Sometimes that can be more of a longer term issue. And so, I'd look at it not just simply what is that funding, what is the kind of profitability. I'd look at it as a profitability rather than just like, what's your revenue model? Because even if you've got strong revenue now, if you're losing money, then guess what? That doesn't look too good over the next 3 to 5 years. Yeah,
that's an excellent point, actually, in terms of a lot of procurement tech companies, both in this space and in the wider procurement tech ecosystem, are very heavily financed by VC money, and that model obviously usually means that they run at a loss up until the point where their growth is sustainable, and then they break even. So, you make a very good point there. I think the other part that I would add more generally is, what is it as a user that you want? So, I mean, if you're in an organization, for example, where you don't have much category expertise in terms of software procurement, you might want to go with a vendor that offers the negotiation as a service type of model. And some of these providers will also underwrite or guarantee that the cost of the software that you're paying them will be covered by benefits that you'll get into your software pricing over a specific time period. Now, obviously, that's not going to pay dividends, year in, year out. You're going to get a sugar hit, first of all, in terms of being able to cut all of the fat out of your spend. So I think that's also something that you want to acknowledge with that model. Even though you might want that as a model, it's going to give you diminishing returns over time, because clearly the lower hanging fruit is going to come immediately. And then going into year 2 and year 3, it's going to be much slimmer pickings because they've taken all of the easy money out of it at the beginning. But again, it depends on what you want. And that is a very nice offering in some cases, if you have low procurement maturity, that you can get a quick hit during year 1 with that type of model.
For sure. And look, that's the challenge that a lot of businesses in our space face, that the churn is significant, because, you save a little bit of money in year 1 and 2, and then ultimately it just doesn't make sense. Beyond that, we don't face that challenge. We have churn of, I think, less than sort of 5% annually. And that's really nice, because that just means our benchmarking data gets better and better every single month. So I think it's a pretty important consideration. The other thing I'll just say is, like, sometimes it's worth just giving it a shot. I think we often see people that, are skeptical of, like, can a free product be just as valuable as these paid options? And once they test out the value, they're pleasantly surprised around the value that we're able to provide. And so, when something's free, there's not a lot of downside to kind of give it a shot initially. And so, that was what I would also encourage you. Before you go and spend $50,000, $100,000 on a tool, why not just test out the free one and see the value it delivers? You can always revert back to paying for something later.
Yeah, excellent point. And on that note, for anyone that's listening to this and thinks, hey, I'd quite like to give this a try, there's a link in the show notes that is my link. So I'm a partner of SpendHound. So if you click on that link, they will know that you've come through listening to this podcast. So you'll get a bit of context as to your inquiry, and Tom or one of his team will be able to walk you through a more detailed demo of the product. We also did a recent live demo with SpendHound as well, and the link to that demo on YouTube is also in the show notes too. How long does it typically take, Tom, to get customers set up? So if someone does want to give it a try and is listening to this, let's assume they're a more sort of mid-market. They're not that complex in terms of their spend. All of their data is coming from one ERP or finance system. How long would it typically take them to get up and running?
Yeah, I mean, assume they use NetSuite, probably the most common sort of mid-market ERP. The integration itself takes 10 minutes. It's a really simple integration that would get set up. That would be the bare minimum. If you could get contracts through to us, that's going to allow us to enrich kind of what we're doing and help with all the benchmarking insights.
So even as PDF or whatever format, it doesn't matter.
You download a zip file, send to us, that's it.
Yeah.
And so it's going to take you, half an hour. Maybe it takes you a little bit longer to chase down some contracts. And then we deliver the platform within sort of 2 to 3 weeks. But we'll start helping you with benchmarking data straight away. So in terms of like time to value, you're talking a few weeks. In terms of actual time out of your day, it could be as little as, an hour or so, and maybe a bit of help from your team to do the integration.
So other than getting the integration set up with the finance system, there's very little involvement required from the customer's IT.
Correct. Once we have access to the data, we do all the work. There's no sort of manual sort of onboarding processes.
Got it. Okay. So hope that was useful. Everyone out there that's listening to this, I just wanted to highlight just one example of a free software tool out there. It just happens to be that SpendHound is one of our partners. There are other free software tools in other categories of procurement tech as well. We'll probably bring them on the show at some point in the future. Also, we did one with FlockScore back in November that is also another free software tool in the supplier performance, supplier quality management space. If you want to check out that episode, especially if you're a manufacturing company, you have a supply chain, that's another good one to look at. Clearly, free B2B software is not a charitable exercise on behalf of a vendor. It's a strategic growth decision, and it's an informed choice ultimately by you as the customer if you want to go down that route, and you just have to know what the risks are and what the potential opportunities are, and to make that decision with all the facts on hand. So the smart move for you as a buyer is not necessarily to avoid or go into this with a lot of skepticism, but you certainly need to understand the incentive structure behind that software, and you need to understand, what terms you're signing up to and whether or not they're normal, as with other use cases throughout the industry, as Tom alluded to earlier on in the episode. Just before we sign off, Tom, if anyone wants to connect with you, where's the best place we should send them?
Yeah, for sure. Well, firstly, feel free to reach out to James if you know James personally. Otherwise, please send an email to info@spendhound.com and I'll make sure that someone picks that up. So info@spendhound.com.
Awesome. Tom, always great talking to you. Cheers. Take care.
Thanks so much, James. Okay, bye.
Okay, that was SpendHound, and that was free to use IT SaaS benchmarking tool. I'm really keen on free tools and very, very affordable entry price point tools more generally. And if you haven't yet, check out our no-code apps that we've built. Just go to entproc.com and then click on the menu item that says no-code apps, and you will go to all the different options that we've got out there in terms of no-code procurement apps at a completely affordable price, starting from just $3,499 as a one-time price that you need to pay for those different apps. I'm all about affordable software for small procurement teams. That's really our focus here at NProc. So if you've got any more ideas of what you'd like to see in terms of a specific bottleneck that you're facing in your procurement org that you've not come across a software that's out there on the market yet that does it, we'd love to hear from you. Maybe I know a tool that can do it, or maybe, hey, it's something that we could even build as a project in the future. I'm always really, really curious to get your specific bottlenecks and pain points to help us understand what we can do to bring affordable software to you. We'll be back again same time next month. Until then, thank you very much for listening. We appreciate there's a lot of procurement podcasts out there, and we're thankful that you've taken time to listen to us today. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Catch you next time. Bye for now.